task. Our task was to think about energy and livelihoods within the context of governance. And with the two groups that we have, we came up with a lot of different issues. The first was that we started with a kind of basic definition of what it was that we were talking about, where we basically said that thinking about governance in relation to livelihoods, we were most interested in what governance structures enable the majority of benefits to flow back to communities, in essence. Thinking about how that operates, we then said the first thing that comes to mind is that actually we're then talking about different scales of governance, different levels of governance, and most essentially how those different scales and levels interface with each other. And that will happen in very different ways within different contexts, and that will have, because of that, very different implications for communities within individual countries and within individual locations and so on. So the key of that is what factors to do with the governance system help to avoid projects, initiatives, the course and direction of energy policy being hijacked by vested interests, or if you can't obviously avoid that, in being able to recognise it and analyse it and try and begin to address it. So we kind of built on some of the discussions from earlier on to say we were talking about politics, but perhaps actually what we're talking about is power and how do those two kind of connect together. We also then got into a whole series of kind of more specific debates. So is the issue over-regulation in terms of governance, or is it actually lack of regulation? Could you actually be talking, obviously, to two different people about the same country within the context of that, or are we talking about countries that have very different patterns in relation to that issue? We also got into the fact that these different scales and levels are not immutable, and that there are a lot of processes of deconcentration, devolution, decentralisation going on, but also that deconcentrating power doesn't necessarily lead to the empowerment of the local level. It can also end up being another source of this sense of the power of vested interests. We then also moved on to look at another aspect of this, which is to do with the relations between private and public sectors, and how that differs within different contexts. We talked quite a bit about Central America within that context. And we also talked about how the governance structures provide greater or lesser amounts of freedom in terms of the development of new initiatives and how free you are to develop new initiatives and so on. So if we can just move on to the second. I don't know if we were allowed to move on to a second sheet, but we did for the second group. We then looked at governance within communities and about the governance of particular projects, initiatives and so on. And the word we came up for that was messy. And in terms of the debates about different ways in which particular projects have been governed, and one colleague was talking about the fact that he's done a lot of interviews within lots of different contexts, and most developers or people that were charged with developing particular energy projects were saying, right, we did it that way, I wouldn't do it like that again. And it seems to be there's an awful lot of reporting back of that kind of perspective, how that's different within different country contexts, and in other country contexts, actually there was quite a lot of discussion about the fact that actually it doesn't seem very different, and the experiences seem quite similar because of the maybe rigidity of governance structures in contrast to other countries where that rigidity isn't so clear. Are we actually dealing with, in answer to that, about least worst answers in terms of how we deal with those kinds of issues? Within the mess, can you come up with a balance? And also, a lot of discussion in relation to community scale governance was this sense of, as people engage with an energy project, and if you do you work through existing structures, do you work through new structures, those kinds of issues and debates. Last few points. How do political governance and energy governance intersect at this particular juncture with the massive amounts of change that are going on within most of the countries that we work? That then talks to the sense that we are living through a period of particularly complex world of current off-grid stakeholders. So you've got so many different private sector, NGO, government, grid, non-grid, working within the same country context. That level of complexity is perhaps unprecedented in terms of the rollout of the situation that's happening within a lot of countries at the moment. And then there was a discussion right at the end about if you are working in an energy project with partners within a particular country, what's your starting point in terms of the levels of governance and so on. So there was a discussion around, the phrase came up from the group that were around the table of going in at all levels. Thank you.
Fantastic, Ed.